Phil Magness, welcome to Dad Saves America.
Happy to be here.
So you are the David J. Thoreau Chair in Political Economy at the Independent Institute.
That's correct.
You're an economic historian, which I think in and of itself is kind of an interesting and lost art. Because as I understand it, if you take economics, even in the most prestigious schools, economic history, the history of economic thought, has increasingly been disregarded. Is that right?
I think that's accurate. And it actually works in both disciplines. It's like the historians ignore the economists and the economists ignore the historians. And then you throw math into the mix, which makes it even more complex.
The best of Karl Marx. So we met because I did a rap video, Mises versus Marx, and we got to talk about good old Karl. What is the best of Karl Marx? Let's just start there. Let's give the devil his due.
Yeah.
What is the best he has to offer for somebody that actually holds up and isn't like immediately invalidated by reality?
Well, and that's the great difficult question because almost all of his economic ideas were obsolete within a couple of years of him penning them down on paper. But, you know, he was very attentive to some of the problems he thought he saw emerging in the 19th century. He's living in an era of industrialization. Big factories are bursting onto the scenes. He's in England most of his adult career. So that is certainly happening around him. And the conditions are not great. They are improving. He thinks they're getting worse, though. So I guess in that sense, he's a perceptive commentator of the era. He's just a bad diagnostician. And what I aim to do in the book was to, give him his due. It's an edited compendium of all of the major works of Marx across his career, basically starting with the Communist Manifesto, some of the stuff he's writing in the 1840s, and it follows all the way through Das Kapital, his great master work, which comes out in 1867 and then has a couple subsequent editions that Engels appends posthumously to it. But it's a compendium that represents the body of Marx's economics.
All right, I'll keep this quick. If you like what you're hearing and want to hear more, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our new content as it comes out every week. And now, back to the conversation.
How should someone understand what Marx is arguing for, without straw manning it? Like what is like the strongest version of like a summary of Marxism?
Yeah. So the gist of it, and this is from Marx himself, he's written several letters to his friends where they'd ask him, like, well, what's your most important point? What's your original contribution? And he always comes back to two things. He says, first, he's come up with what he claims is a scientific theory of history, or a materialist theory of history. He thinks that humanity is locked in this struggle over control over material resources, and it's the haves, the have-nots. We see this map onto his work, like the bourgeois versus the proletariat, the owners of capital versus the rest. And he thinks that the numbers game in the long run is in his favor because there are more poor people than there are rich people. And that is going to be the instigating drive that almost has like a destiny of the poor rising up and seizing the means of production, and they're going to emerge triumphant in the end. And he uses this framework to study history in a bunch of different stages. So he sees a movement from feudalism to capitalism. This is a disruptive stage, and this is a playing out of this material contest. He thinks, well, what happens next? Capitalism transforms into socialism, probably a state socialism. Then state socialism transforms into the final state, which is communism. And that's where Engels famously says, the state will wither away under communism.
This is the moneyless, stateless, classless society, right?
Indeed, a true proletarian society. And it's because there are more of them than there are owners of capital. And he sees this as a matter of justice, so his second major contribution, and he always says this, is he thinks he's discovered a basic rule of economic activity. And that is a rule of analysis he refers to as the theory of surplus value. He says he starts from the old classical position that value derives from the labor performed to improve something. This isn't distinctively Marxist. You have elements of it in John Locke. Mm-hmm. Adam Smith toys around with it, but he finds some problems with it. Nonetheless, it's how most economists thought until about the mid-19th century. You do work, you improve a pile of wood into a piece of furniture. The value of the furniture comes from the work that you performed. And Marx,
Intuitive.
Yeah, it's intuitive. It doesn't always hold up. We can get into that, but Marx sees this and he says, well, wait a minute. The owners of the factory are not paying their workers the full value of what they've done to create the product. They give them like a minimum subsistence wage, and then they sell the furniture for a much higher price, and they take the rest as profit. And Marx says, well, there's something unjust about this because the factory owner is not really doing the work, it's the worker. And he comes up with, there's all sorts of permutations of it, but the difference between those two is essentially the core theory of surplus value.
And so that's what, when Marx talks about exploitation, right?
Yes.
He's got a particular concept, right?
Exactly. It's depriving the worker of what they have done, what they have contributed to the production of the good, and then selling it at a much higher price and basically taking the residual, taking the difference between the two. And that's the exploitative act. It's because the factory owner, the capital owner, has not done the labor himself. He is claiming somebody else's product as his own and pushing the worker into subsistence just out of material dependence.
I can't help but think recently the New York Times posted this like bright, giggly conversation with Hassan Piker and another like New Yorker writer whose beat appeared to involve largely talking about like Jennifer Lawrence's outfits or something.
Yeah.
But they were both asked like what's the least understood thing or something to that effect, and he says like the concept of surplus labor value. Like he went right at like for the viewer who's like, oh no, we're getting into some arcane history. It's like, well, it is arcane history, but it's also the arcane history motivating some of the biggest sort of left-wing influencers on Earth.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this surplus value concept, Marx identifies it's the real core of his theory. He claims that this is my original innovation. I have disproven political economy. Because I have found the mechanism here in surplus value that explains exploitation. And then he comes up with all these different rules and predictions that supposedly come out of it. It's like a race to the bottom where the worker is going to be pushed into subsistence because the capital owner just keeps extracting more and more and more. And this supposedly drives the worker to eventually rise up and revolt, to seize the means of production.
So that's the immiseration of workers, right?
Exactly. So
why does he think that that's going to happen? Why does he think that there's going to be this like race to the bottom?
Well, he is convinced that he has found a scientific explanation of how human beings interact over economic matters, over material resources. He likens himself to the Darwin of the social sciences. In fact, he mails a copy of Das Kapital to Charles Darwin and says, you did this for biology, I did this for political economy, you should read my book. And Darwin like shoves it in the back of the shelf and never pays attention to it.
But, I mean, the ironic thing there, right, is and I can't remember the direction here, but is it Darwin being inspired by Smith, or is it the other way around?
Darwin does come after Smith, and he's looking for spontaneous orders in the world.
Yes. So Darwin's like, you have this process by which changes happen in an undirected way, largely as a matter of trial and error, experimentation. And then along comes Marx like, I'm just like you, only mine is that there's no experimentation. It's a top-down system.
I found a formula. Although Marx would say, it's coming from the bottom up because it's always the workers that are leading the revolt. So he's by definition saying, yes, this is a bottom-up thing. But then there's a twist. The workers never really organize in the way that he wants them to break. This starts in the 1848 revolutions when he writes the Communist Manifesto. He's like, oh, come on, workers, do your thing. You're supposed to do this. And it doesn't play out the way that he wants. He tries again in 1871, the Paris Commune, and he's cheering them from across the channel in England kind of after the fact, but he's saying, this was our moment. You should listen to me. But the problem is the workers do not collectively organize in the way that he would predict because there's a free ridership problem. Workers, like, what's your option? Take to the streets, put yourself on the firing lines and probably get squashed by the police or something. Or I can sit here at home and hope that somebody else will advocate for better wages for me.
Well, I want to come to and step by step move through the rebuttals that I think you and I share about Marx. But I want to make sure we give him his full hearing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because I think we live in this time where it's very easy to sort of straw man people's ideas. And you are an actual scholar that has actually read him, understands him, even as a critic. And so I would love to get like a real genuine communist Marxist to sit with me and advocate for their position. It's surprisingly hard.
Yes, I've had the same thing. I've tried to engage them and debate them, and it's a continuous moving target. And I think part of the problem is when you get to Marx's original formulation, it doesn't work. And it really comes under withering criticism by the end of the 19th century. There are problems found in his economic formula. So what do Marxists do? Rather than like adjust to the problems, they just reinvent and reinterpret Marx in a new direction. It's like, okay, surplus value doesn't work, but here we have this other thing. The method of exploitation that he's predicted and all the predictions based on it, they aren't playing out. But maybe it's a sociological phenomenon where the worker is just alienated from the fruits of his labor, and this causes a different type of slightly different type of feelings of exploitation.
So let's hit on a couple of the other concepts that are because I'm surprised in a certain sense to hear that you didn't put the abolition of private property in your list of the top things to understand about Marxism.
Right. That's stated as it's kind of like an assumption, an after fact. And Marx, he's ambiguous at different places about where he sees property fitting into the whole paradigm. He is really a group collective thinker. So communal property, I think, is assumed to be kind of the end result. And communal property in the sense that this is people acting as representatives of the class, of the proletariats, of the worker.
So what does that mean? Like when Marx is trying to like make the argument for communism, what does he think that means literally? Like what is his vision of the communist society?
Yeah. So he is actually fairly notorious. He does not put too much specificity into what this society is going to emerge afterward. He's certain it's going to emerge. But like the mechanics of actually enacting it, how would it govern itself? How would it operate? There's very little in terms of a prescription plan. And this becomes a problem for him later in life. He publishes Das Kapital, this giant manifesto in 1867. It's really not noticed very much except among socialists. But he certainly has this big plan. And some of his fellow socialist thinkers start to criticize it. And they say, wait a minute. You're making an error here. This looks like a textbook manual to descend into authoritarian dictatorship.
Really?
Yes. Yeah. So he gets that criticism within the International Working Men's Association. There's a big rift between the different factions. There's a Marx faction and there's another kind of anarchic faction. And the anarchists point out, says, you've just accidentally written a manual for dictatorship. And Marx says, no, I'm not doing that. But we start to see some other signs. So the Paris Commune in 1871, this is in the aftermath of the Franco-Prussian War. Napoleon III is the Emperor of France, gets routed at a battle, and very surprisingly by the Prussian army, and basically has to abdicate. So there's a period of chaos, and during that aftermath, the period of chaos, kind of this left-wing faction, they were called the Communards. So they were in the socialist realm, although they're followers of a different theorist, Blanqui, not Marx.
Okay.
Marx is in London, but the Communards descend on the city of Paris and take control of it for a few weeks. And it's all chaos. It's just a mob rule, that kind of things. They're burning down buildings. They're purporting to set up a society. And Marx is watching.
It's Seattle. It's Seattle in 2020, basically.
Yeah, exactly. It's the autonomous zone type of thing. But the whole city of Paris.
The CHOP.
Yeah.
Whatever.
And meanwhile, France its government's in chaos, but they finally get the armies together. And they're like, wait a minute, this can't go on. And so they go and they retake the city. Marx is watching from across the channel in England, and he's writing about it and kind of waiting for his moment. It's like, maybe my revolution is here. And he writes a series of pamphlets and letters where he basically says, yes, this is a sign of the dictatorship of the proletariat type of a situation emerging. But he says there's a problem, because he's writing after the fact, after they've been crushed. He says there's a problem here. They didn't do what was necessary to win. They didn't go the full length, is effectively his critique of them. But he doesn't specify what that full length would have been. But you can kind of read between the lines as like they weren't authoritarian enough.
They didn't kill literally everyone.
Exactly. They had their opportunity and they squandered it because they didn't do what was necessary to be done.
One of the things that you have done work on is the emergence of Marx as the dominant thinker.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tee that up to first ask what else was going on at his time. Like, where does the term socialism first emerge?
Yeah.
What does it mean? Because one of the things today is when you talk to people, especially like, on Reddit or whatever.
Right.
It's always like, no, that's not socialism. No, that's not communism. In our rap video that we made, which has like 15,000 comments, it's very predictable that there's a lot of this wasn't real Marxism that you've described.
It is not true socialism.
It's not true socialism. It's never been
tried.
So there's all these sort of like evasive things, but there were a lot of different thinkers.
Yeah.
So lay out the history of this notion of socialism.
Yeah.
It's particularly leading up to the time where Marx is among other thinkers.
Right. So socialism long predates Marx as a thinker. There are elements of it in even some of the ancient philosophical texts. Some people have interpreted socialism kind of in hindsight out of Plato even. It's a little weird, but you can see bits and pieces. It really comes into its own kind of in the wake of the French Revolution. So, 1789, if we give or take, is about that whole period. There are actually proto-Marxian thinkers. Babeuf is this. He's one of these really radical characters out of the French Revolutionary era, and he comes up with basically the same formula as Marx, something really close to anticipating what Marx would later call surplus value.
I've been revisiting the French Revolution because the like Jacobin as a character strikes me as something that we are experiencing now.
Yes.
So, what happened there? Because it sure seems like France is like the birthplace of all the worst ideas in the world.
Right.
So you have Rousseau.
Yeah.
This thinker who is quite utopian.
Yeah, and
he believes in like a kind of how do you understand Rousseau? Like, who was Rousseau, and how do you understand like his role in laying seeds for this garden of socialist thought?
I mean, I'd start with basically David Hume's observation of Rousseau. Hume had Rousseau as a house guest for a period, and by the end of it, he's like writing these letters to his friends. It's like, there's this crazy Frenchman that's occupying my bedroom. I can't get rid of him because he thought,
So moochers right from the start.
Exactly.
Great.
Exactly. It's really kind of comedic the way that it plays it. No, but Rousseau's a complex thinker. I mean, he's obviously very intelligent, but he's also head in the clouds. He has a couple of fixed ideas that he keeps coming back to. He's most famous as a social contract theorist. And he does lay that out as like a political doctrine.
So that we basically abide by an unwritten contract for how we live?
It is. And there are certain elements of that make sense. They're intuitive. I think where he takes it is a little strange. He's also obsessed with this concept of equality. And he uses that as kind of a mechanism, a motivator for a lot of his prescriptive work. And then he also has kind of these ideas of a blank slate of someone's head on how you could form a human person and what kind of ideas you could inject into their thought and rebuild mankind, essentially.
This is
you see where that's kind of headed.
This blank slate tabula rasa human.
Yeah.
This sort of like, you kind of imagine from like this the sci-fi, like before the 3D printer gives the humanoid the features, it's just this sort of manufactured blob,
Yeah.
genderless blob thing.
Yeah, it's resin in the reservoir. It's just essentially.
That echoes into Marx,
It does. It does.
right?
Yeah.
How so?
Yeah,
From your
well,
perspective.
Well, I think you see a continuum here. This notion that we can reorder society if only we figure out the real truth. We get down to the real rules. And you know, for Marx, he's writing almost a century after Rousseau. There are other ideas that have been imported in here. He actually comes out of continental Europe, the Hegelian scene. So he's trained as a Hegelian philosopher. And this is where he gets like this constant conflict theory, the strife, the battle between the two sides. But he sees those as mechanisms that bring rules of kind of like the economic universe together. And it's really this contest over material resources. We just need to figure out how those rules work. And in doing so, we orient the different components of society to their right place. We direct them to their right place.
Why does he think he knows what the right place should be?
Well, because his socialism, unlike Babeuf or Saint-Simon or Robert Owen or all these other socialist theorists that came before him in the wake of the French Revolution and some early 19th century European thought, he thinks his socialism is scientific. He keeps stressing this term. He has science envy. You know, you always hear the joke that economists have science envy.
Yeah.
Karl Marx obsessively has science envy. It's back to the Charles Darwin thing. He's always saying, all these socialists before me, even though their ideas sound a lot like what I'm advocating here, because he was always being accused of plagiarizing these people that came before him, he said, no, I'm different because they were utopians. I figured out the scientific rules, the mechanisms behind it. And really those rules come down to material resources are scarce. I know the formula by which they interact with each other. I know the formula by which the contestation plays out, and I know where the numbers are.
So Marx levels the criticism that the other socialists that came before him and were also happening at the time were utopian.
Yes.
Why? How did he lay that out with more detail than just saying, using it to like hand wave them away? Because the end state of his ideas sure sounds like a
utopian. Right.
A moneyless, classless,
Society.
staceless society in which man is basically reformulated to not be governed by self-interest and is like new socialist man. How is that not? What part of that's less utopian than the people that came before exactly?
Right.
Like, where's he coming from there besides like, I have the science?
Yeah. So the quest for wanting to have the science is the big motivating factor. And it's also the quest for differentiating his product from all these other earlier socialists that sound a lot like him. And also differentiating himself from other contemporaries that sound a lot like him. So he starts to lay this out. It appears in the Communist Manifesto, again, 1848. And it becomes a recurring theme through his works and then Engels' interpretations of his works after he dies in 1883. They all emphasize Marx is different. Marx has taken socialism to the next level. He's taken this blob of ideas that were kind of tilting in the right direction under earlier predecessor socialists, but he's given them scientific form because he's discovered the mechanisms of what drives the force of history forward.
Are there any distinctive elements of the other socialists' thought or experiments or communes or anything that are worth knowing about to understand the history here?
Yeah. I mean, you look at both his predecessors. So like Robert Owen actually does try to set up communes. And as an elaborate theory, most of these societies, they fail, they peter away. The other really interesting one that I like to look at is because he's a contemporary of Marx, is a character by the name of Johann Karl Rodbertus. So Rodbertus lives in roughly the same period as Marx does. He had been involved in Prussian politics, was briefly a member of their elected assembly. But he's also a theorist. We would refer to him as something like a democratic socialist today. So very much on the left. Things are in flux. So he kind of falls in a liberal faction to some degree, but he's a socialist thinker. Rodbertus is interesting because about a decade and a half before Karl Marx comes up with his great original contribution to surplus value, Rodbertus writes down the exact same thing. And in the eyes of many of Marx's contemporaries, Rodbertus's version of it was more coherent, more thoroughly developed, a better presentation of the idea.
Now, the idea that I go to work, I make this thing, and then it gets sold at a price that's well in excess of what I was paid.
Yeah.
That's super intuitive. I think
Yes.
the average person to this day can look at that and be like, not understand what else is going on there.
They're taking my value because I created that value with the labor I performed.
But the other piece I want to make sure I understand before we start to move the clock forward a little bit is like, the term capitalism comes from Marx, right? I mean, is that the origin of it as a slur against?
So it's popularized by him. It's in the title, capital.
Yeah.
But there are earlier uses of it. But it's an amorphous term that really starts to emerge and be associated with a new age of history, the capitalist age, really because that's the way that Marx frames it. He's saying that this is a new thing that has displaced an older feudal order.
Well, and this is the part, we draw these lines in history, like the Industrial Revolution, or like feudalism. We hear about feudalism in school, and then along comes, I guess, this next phase, and now we're in like industrial London, and now we're in capitalism.
Yeah.
And there's like this transition as if it's like a company that swaps CEOs and they have a new business plan.
Yeah, yeah.
Help me understand like what reality is there, because I don't because that all strikes me as a story being told.
Yeah, and it's done through hindsight. In fairness to Marx, he doesn't say it's like in January 1803 capitalism started or something. That'd be kind of nonsensical. It reduces it down to everything. He sees a disruptive process playing out over probably the course of a couple centuries that shifts the paradigm.
And what is that process exactly? And what part of it's actually correct? Because I mean, you have all kinds of things happening all at the same time, right?
Yeah.
Including the birth of the United States. The United States.
Absolutely.
So yeah. What is? How do you understand this transition that a lot of us will hear about kind of vaguely in school about from feudalism to what comes next?
Well, we look at the feudal order. This is us today looking back at how people maintain their relationships. The classic version is the lord of the manor, the king in the castle on the top of the hill, and then he has the serfs that are tied to his personal estate below him, and the serfs work in service of the community, but their lot in life is pretty set. You're a farmer. You don't really own your farm. You work the Lord's land. And working the Lord's land allows him to build the castle and defend you and take care of that society. It's often overlaid with a religious mandate. Said, well, the Lord is the Lord because divine will wants him to be. We know this story because it plays out in how the Middle Ages are really structured. And what starts to happen, first very slowly, you see it in some of the trading cities of the Mediterranean, the emergence of the banking empires. You start
the Medicis?
Seeing, you start seeing, the previous order is the landowners, the master, the lord, and then the serfs. Those are the only two real lots in life. Maybe you have the clergy off to the side. But you start seeing an emergence of a merchant class that's doing something different. They're not just working the land, and they're certainly not the king of the castle, but they're accumulating wealth onto themselves, separate and apart from being tied to this big estate.
So one of the things that it's like I want to break down here is the role of land itself, of land ownership, seems pretty central to the thinking of a lot.
Big part of it,
a lot of because it's like, one could say that look, it is a weird thing to lay claim to this parcel.
Yeah,
like, I mean, if you want to really be kind to Marx and that mode of thinking is, what right really do you have outside of essentially using force to keep other people from taking it from you?
Well, that's exactly it. And then they like the flip side of that is, well, if you improved upon the land, maybe it was a swamp and you drained the swamp and turned it into something useful and productive. You improved on it. That's where your property ownership comes from.
And that's John Locke.
That's the Lockean version. Yeah.
How do you think about the actual what ends up fundamentally being a kind of moral argument for private property, particularly around land? How do you think about what is the best way to think about that?
Yeah, so it's a tricky one because part of it is kind of a fable. We don't have a recorded history of the first landowner. We tell
There's not
ourselves,
a chain of title going back to Adam and Eve.
right, right, and it's although there is kind of this fable that's in there. It's like, well, tending to the tree that bears fruit, you pick the fruit, you are doing work. Therefore, it's yours. And this was the John Locke story there. Yeah. Although there's something intuitive back there. Where does land ownership come from? Is it like the moral case is, yes, you're building upon it, you're improving it. That's the friendly way. The other way is, well, your neighbor has something you don't. You go in with an army and you seize it.
We've seen both.
And we have seen both. So like the improvement story of land is a way to say this is how we ethically settle previously unclaimed land. The seizure story is how we conquer our neighbors and take their stuff.
One of the other ways I think you can think about this, rather than land, is just agreement.
Yeah.
Contract.
Yeah. That's.
And is that actually a different sort of school of thought that comes about?
Yeah. Well, the modern version of it's the Ronald Coase story. It's the establishment of clear and predictable property rights is the thing that matters, not the origin. Because when you have property rights, things start to actually settle out through predictable, measured transactions that tend to be more just in the end.
There's a set of is it Vernon Smith?
Yeah.
Economist does laboratory experiments.
Exactly. And setting up people in a controlled environment, saying, well, we're going to give you this group resources and this group less resources. And it's go trade, go do something. And this started, he was an economics educator. He did his first experiment in the classroom. He's like, I'm going to try to teach people how to figure out supply and demand curves by setting up these games. And then he starts recording the observations from the games. It's by and large, they play out as you would expect. They confirm the theory.
So we have, because I'm getting super narrow and subtle here about because I think that the argument that gets made that I think maybe is one of the reasons why Marx continues to be popular.
Yes. Yeah.
Is I think it's partly that there's a moral argument that touches on something here in the ownership of property that's ambiguous enough that it leaves it open for a person of goodwill to be like, yeah, I don't know about that seems like might makes right. So if that's the rule, I have a different might makes right story I think would be more fair.
I think that cuts to the core of it. There's a moral claim that if I work on something, I improve it, I make it better, it is by right mine. If, on the other hand, if somebody else gets their stuff by stealing it, by taking it away, that's a violation of my moral intuition. So if you're in a framework, a paradigm where those are the two ways that property is dispersed, land is improved, goods are made, wages are settled. Well, if it looks like someone's taking your stuff away, seizing your surplus value, they're exploiting you. They're in the wrong.
So one of the things about this is, you have this notion here of surplus value, which is to say that I'm in the factory floor, I'm manufacturing an iPhone from all these parts, and then I'm getting paid peanuts per unit, and then I see the iPhone goes on sale for $1,500.
Exactly.
Isn't that claim to the value of the phone, isn't that basically the same story as John Locke? It's well, aren't you basically saying that you agree with John Locke that by mixing your labor with the stuff, you have a claim to it? Isn't he actually reinforcing the moral argument for private property?
Right. Right. Well, in a way, it sounds like that. But there's another component, another dimension of this. Could you go make an iPhone from scratch in your garage? Probably not.
There was a story that I want to say this was around the time of the financial crisis.
Mm-hmm.
A group of students in the goal of trying to be like totally disconnected from any notion of trade.
Yeah.
And they're like, we're going to make a suit from
From
whole
scratch.
cloth from scratch, and without relying on any kind of trading partners, so that they could lay claim that it is literally whole cloth their creation.
Yeah.
And it cost something like the equivalent of $10,000 and was horrible.
Right. It looks exactly like something you would have. You're shearing the sheep yourself, and
So we've got this debate about private property. We've got Marx surrounded by other thinkers, many of whom are bringing up very similar ideas. He's got this central, what he believes is an insight.
Yeah.
You have this essentially like source of tension and strife in the exploitation of surplus value by from workers to
the owners of capital. Yeah.
And he's not alone, and he's not necessarily all that remarkable per se, right? So this brings us to your actual work. So as we sit here today, almost everybody that you will encounter that calls themselves a socialist or a communist, and there's a rising amount of people who just straight up say I'm a communist, which is it's really something
kind of interesting. Yeah.
They'll all cite Marx.
Absolutely.
It's not like, oh, I'm sort of derivative of Sismondi or something. No, it's all Marx.
Yeah.
So how did we get here? Is it a meritorious victory of ideas?
It is very much not that. As I mentioned, Marx has all these competitor socialists and kind of out in the ether. And again, remember, this is really the fringes of society. This is the tail of a political movement. Socialism is not a huge thing in the 19th century. It's there. It's often amorphous. It's associated with labor movements. It does emerge in left-wing politics, and sometimes they win electoral victories. Sometimes their ideas rise to the top, and then sometimes they get defeated. But it's not like there's a big socialist contingent out there.
And like the Jacobins who take over France in the aftermath, like Robespierre and all the various people chopping off heads.
Yeah.
They're not really socialists, really? Or what are they?
They're radicals.
They're just radicals? What do they want?
That's part of the problem why they eventually falter is they can't really decide what they want. And they succumb to infighting. They also succumb to the fact that their own numbers, they view themselves as kind of self-appointed representatives of the masses. But they're really a small group. This is an observation Friedrich Hayek makes about revolutions in general. They always purport to speak on behalf of the masses, but it's often like educated elites. And you look at some of the major Jacobins, they're like dilettante sons of aristocrats, and or they're well educated.
They're the Hassan Pikers and the Mamdanis.
That's exactly it.
I am a man of the people. Pay no attention to my academic father and my Bollywood mother.
Right. It's
and my gallivanting around the world on jets.
Exactly. And in a way, Karl Marx himself is of that. He's university educated. His father was well-to-do, probably like middle class, upper middle class. Engels even more so. Engels has a rich dad who owns a factory in Manchester and basically says, son, here's your job for life. I want you to go run this factory. And Engels becomes the manufacturer himself. And then is like he's that friend that keeps seeding money to Karl Marx to go write your books. But neither of them are actual factory workers themselves.
So we arrive at the beginning of the 20th century, right? And how does Marx end up being somebody that ends up in busts in the Soviet Union and spread around the world?
Well, and there's the answer. It is the Soviet Union. So remember, Marx, he publishes Das Kapital in 1867. The thing is a complete flop. I think he ran, the original print run was about 1,000 copies, and nobody read it. Marx himself even acknowledges, he joked that he didn't make any money off of the sale of Das Kapital. He actually spent more on buying cigars while he was writing it. It was kind of the self-deprecating joke. So he knew this. He still thought it was an important book. he still thought it was like this essential insight. So Marx is very fond of his own creation, his intellectual insight, and he's like waiting for people to discover his genius, mailing copies out to Darwin and others, like, look at me, look what I did. But he never really gets the fame. Marx never really gets the fame that he thought he deserved. And the reason is he was operating in an obsolete system of value. This theory of surplus value is built upon this notion of labor performed, the labor theory of value. And again, we know that goes back to antiquity. We know Adam Smith deals with it. We know most classical economists kind of accepted it as the intuitive way of where value comes from.
And one of the ideas that tries to bring it to life, right, is this sort of diamond water paradox.
Exactly.
Right? Like,
exactly.
so wait a second, why is it that water, which is essential for life, is cheap compared to shiny rocks, which serve no real purpose outside of like industrial use that won't even be discovered for hundreds of years, but are people will kill for these things with blood diamonds, while like cups of clean water sit there ignored. Yeah. So how does this work?
The diamond and water paradox. This is one of the first kind of discoveries. There's something wrong with this theory of value that labor performed is what basically makes something. And they notice not even just diamonds versus water and their uses. They notice the value of water and diamonds changes based on the circumstance. If you're in the middle of the desert, water is a lot more valuable than diamonds.
Right.
And you could be walking through the desert with a bag of diamonds, and your choice is, I give that to the other guy that has a bottle of water, or else I die. Move that to the city, and a bottle of water is everywhere, and it's abundant. Diamonds are now this desirable thing that you put in your jewelry. So Smith is dealing with this. He notices it, and they find other versions of this type of a paradox emerging. There's a non-transitivity between the different values that are associated with the given goods at the moment.
So the fact that I spent some amount of time, let's say, making a thing, doesn't, if that were some underlying scientific determinant of its value, why is it that when I take it here, I can sell it for X, but if I take it over here, I can sell it for X plus 10?
Well, and there's the paradox. What they're seeing, labor performed to improve something often does increase its value through a correlation effect. You're turning a pile of wood into furniture. Mm-hmm. But there's another one. It's David Ricardo, who is operating in the same universe, this labor theory of value. He starts writing letters to his friends. He says, well, I drink wine, and if I get a fine wine from France versus a not so fine wine from, let's put in Scotland or something, I could get a lot more money for the bottle of wine made out of the Bordeaux region of France than I could for the whatever swill they're making in Scotland. Yet the labor performed to smash up the grapes and put them in bottles is exactly the same no matter where you are, but there's a reason that they taste different. And one of those tastes happens to align with the human palate. The other is basically undrinkable. So he's writing to his friend. It's like, I can't figure this out. Why does wine from one region cost a whole lot, and wine from another region, I couldn't find a buyer if I wanted to? So he says, there's a paradox here. Maybe we're missing something. And he never really solves it. But what happens is a generation of economists after him, they start to really drill down. And they discover what we refer to as the theory of subjective value. Mm-hmm. And they unite this with a theory of when the moment of the transaction occurs, or they can refer to it as marginalism. It occurs on the margin of the exchange. So what's the theory of subjective value is, I have my own personal tastes. You have your own personal taste. Neither of us is right or wrong about whose taste is superior. I might like red cars. You might like blue cars. It doesn't mean that the red car is more valuable than the blue car, but I would be willing to pay more for the red car than the blue car if that's my preference. So that goes into the equation. And then it's also the circumstance of the exchange. If I'm in the desert and I need water to survive and I have a bag of diamonds, I will give up that bag of diamonds to get the water. If I'm on the streets of New York and I have a bag of diamonds and someone says, oh, I'll give you a single water bottle for that, I'd laugh at them.
This subjective value, is it Karl Menger that first fully articulates this?
So it's a kind of a weird coincidence of history, there are really about three people, and two that are the core of it. This is William Stanley Jevons in the UK, who's a mathematician economist, and then Karl Menger in Vienna, Austria. Both start writing economics books in 1871, and they're published nearly simultaneously, and they're dealing with this problem of value. And then Leon Walras comes a couple years later. So these are the three figures of the marginal revolution. Menger and Jevons are first. They both solve the theory of value, this paradox that's emerged that economists had been trying to wrap their heads around in 1871. And they basically say value is determined at the moment of the exchange by the circumstances of the exchange under personal subjective valuation of the people, the parties to the exchange.
I mean, there's the easiest way is on a personal level. Like you mentioned some that I think are great, like just like different colors of car. But fashion. Why is it that the same dress, when it comes out new and it is sort of the like accessible version of what was on the runway, is worth a lot more than the next season where it's the same dress, but it's not new anymore.
Right.
And it
Tastes have changed. And making the dress, the sewing the cloth together, it's about the same process. Are you building surplus value that's being taken away from you by doing the same process on two different dresses that are different in price because of the circumstance? No.
So you have, so connect the dots between, I want to make sure this is understood for the viewer.
Yeah.
Because it's such a fundamental linchpin of being a good economic thinker. It's one of the things that is not intuitive. It's both not intuitive and completely intuitive. Because we all know that we have different things we value. I happen to be a Lego maniac. I love Legos. I will spend the money on Legos. And there are lots of people who think Legos are too damn expensive.
Right.
And would never spend $400 for some Lego set. It's like, what are you, crazy? You're an adult.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I will because I like it.
But you derive utility, you derive personal value out of being able to piece things together. Someone else looks at it and it's like, this is this little brick I stumble on and it hurts my foot, and the kids have that.
So we understand that at the moment, especially when we're talking about the different things we like and dislike, the different restaurants we would rather go to. Why would you ever spend that much to go to that restaurant? I can just go get a slice of pizza. I like it more. And yet it turns out that is like this really central linchpin in pulling the rug out from Marx. Why? Why does that actually break his system, even in theory?
Yeah, because if it turns out if value is not determined by labor performed, you cannot do this surplus value calculation the way that he asserts that it's going to play out. If you pull the labor theory of value out of the Marxist system, the entire edifice he's built on top of it, surplus value leading to exploitation, leading to the worker feeling the need to rise up and seize the means of production, it just collapses. And this is what really kind of happens in the aftermath. Because remember, Marx writes in 1867. 4 years later, 1871, is when Jevons and Menger write their solution, essentially. The marginal theory of value emerges as a supplanting mechanism to solve this age-old economic paradox. And it actually works. So it takes the field by storm. Probably over the course of about the next 2 decades, it upends the study of economics. And Marx is left in the wake of it. Like he's a non-entity even by this point. He's a writer at the very tail end of the classical era. Paul Samuelson called him a minor post-Ricardian in terms of his economic theory. He's dealing with old ideas that have been supplanted and debunked by this new paradigm, this new system of thinking, and he doesn't even know it. Like he dies not having engaged or encountered the marginal revolution. And even more so on top of that, Menger and Jevons, they have no idea who this Karl Marx guy is, at least in the time that he's alive. Menger learns of him later in life because he lives into the early 20th century. But at the time they're coming up with their observations and solutions to the problem of value, Marx is like this non-entity.
How do you know that? How do you know that his influence in the world of the study of economics and trying to understand the way the world works in material terms, that he's left in the dust by the people who are actually trying to understand this stuff.
Well, you read the other economists. And the first clue we have actually comes from Marx's own contemporaries, people that knew him, his friends, his fellow socialists. And there's one by the name of Henry Heidemann who befriends him. He's an English socialist that befriends Marx late in life. And he writes a memoir. He says, well, yeah, when Marx died in 1883, nobody knew who he was. He's just this like non-entity. There's a famous book by the more recent 20th century historian Philip Foner, who's a Marxist socialist type, and he wrote a book on Marx's funeral. It's like a history of Marx's funeral. How was it received? And he's thinking, going into this book, you read the intro to the book, he thinks, well, I'm going to find all these obituaries of the great man. They saw that it was like the passing of the ages. And he has this aha moment. He says, well, I'm reading all the newspapers and almost nobody covered his obituary except when Engels paid to telegram it out to people. And he's like, well, why didn't the major papers cover Marx's funeral? And he comes to the conclusion, well, maybe the reputation wasn't there yet. So you have socialist testimonials. W.E.B. Du Bois is a famous Marxist sociologist, civil rights activist. Read his memoirs. He's complaining that when he went to Harvard in the 1890s, nobody taught Marx. And he's like, well, why isn't this great theorist in every classroom? And he says, well, they thought he was a weirdo and they kind of scoffed at him. So you have all these testimonials by people that are adamantly devoted to Marx in their own careers, in their own lives, but they admitted in the 19th century that he's kind of this forgotten thing in the background.
Was it just sometimes, people just, it takes time for the society to catch up to the brilliant insights, and that's why later he ends up being like the most cited, most read
most
writer.
Frequently assigned college syllabus.
Right. Yeah. Particularly in all of the not economics fields like history, anthropology, sociology, psychology, all the sort of soft, one might say soft-headed disciplines.
Right. Well, and if you think about this, okay, if Marx has this original groundbreaking insight on political economy that he claimed he had, other economists would start to notice it, right? And maybe then the ideas play out in debates, in intellectual texts, back and forth. So some of that actually does start to happen, but it's not until about a decade and a half after Das Kapital comes out. And remember that the marginalists start in 1871. The first marginalist that really even notices Marx, he's kind of a student of Jevons. It's an English writer by the name of Philip Wicksteed. 1884. So after Marx has died, he finally picks up and comes across this book, Das Kapital, and he writes a review of it. and the review is basically, this is obsolete. Jevons showed the theory of value had been solved through marginal analysis. Marx has built his edifice on something that is antiquated, that we've since come to discover is wrong. And it's like a 5 or 6 page review, and it's like takes down this entire 1,000-page text.
So how is it then that the Bolsheviks and Lenin in particular, and maybe is that the right place to start? Pick him up and say, this is our guy.
Right. So Lenin is a central figure in this. Marx, he's not completely neglected in the late 19th century. He's not like completely ignored. There are people that are aware of him, but he's in the socialist mixture versus the Rodbertians, versus the Proudhonites, versus all these little camps we never think about today, the Lassalleans. These are competitor socialists. And then the economists are reading him, and after Wicksteed kind of raises this to their attention, the marginalists start to look at Marx, and then they start dissecting him. And you get a stream of books and articles saying, this is antiquated, this is obsolete. By about 1907, the Marxists published a new edition, a new translation of Das Kapital. They sent it to the Economic Journal, which is the leading scholarly journal of economics, and say, hey, can you review this? And the reviewer looks at it and is like, why are we tilting at this windmill still? This is nonsense, is basically the message. So by about 1900 to 1910-ish or so, Marx is already viewed as obsolete in the economics profession. They dealt with them, they engaged with them, they found problems in his theory. Some people tried to mathematize it. They found an inconsistency that's referred to as the transformation problem. How do you reconcile labor as a priced input as well as a wage paid output? Well, it turns out there's like a circularity there. Very intuitive things. And if you do the deep math on it, you can't solve the circularity. And Marx actually kind of knew that and danced around it in his later works. This is why Volume 2, 3, and 4 of Das Kapital that he promised never really get published until after his death, because there really is this sordid notes that Engels is trying to make some sense of. So
Wait, this might be so deep of the weeds that it'll be hard for people to understand, but I want to make sure I understand the circularity problem.
Yeah.
I don't think I fully understand it. So break it down for me.
Yeah. So it gets down to, if you are trying to price something, labor is an input to producing something.
Okay.
But labor also has a wage associated with it. The laborer gets paid. It's an output. And if you bring the two together to try to reconcile labor as both an input and an output, you need some price mechanism connecting the two. How do you know how to pay for the input? How do you know the value of the input?
The way I think about this is that I want to hire someone. Let's say I want to produce a video.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And I'm trying to figure out if the video is going to make money.
Yeah.
Because I know I can put it on YouTube and there'll be a certain amount of ad revenue, assuming I get viewers, which I might not get any viewers. So I might not get any revenue.
Right.
But let's assume, I kind of have a sense of it based on history and looking out there. So I say, all right, I need to hire a video editor to edit this video. If they want to charge me more than I'm going to be able to make, I'm not going to pay that because it won't work. So I have to somehow either find someone or find somebody that has the experience level that's willing to take what it's worth, what I think it's worth, based on my little guess of what I might be able to make on the video. Or maybe my ideas for how complex this video is aren't really in line with what it's going to be worth in the end. Yeah. And so I just need to keep it simpler so that the cost matches the output. I can't try to build a Mercedes to sell, next to the used car lot, because I'm going to end up underwater. Well, now maybe I made that too complicated, but I
think it gets down to the basics. You need some point of information, some point of reference to know if you're paying the laborer the right amount for this good. And you also need, when the laborer comes back to you and says, no, I want more, what's your point of reference to discover if they are actually owed more? Yeah.
And if I'm on the worker side, the reason why it's worth lingering on this is because this is at the heart of the intuitions that drive people like Hassan Piker.
Yeah.
They think that and sometimes there's an argument to be made that at any given point you might be getting paid less than you could be paid for what you're capable of.
And their outlook is, you get the value of the work performed is you have to add up all the different steps, and the aggregation should reflect each different component, and that's how you get to the fair point of production. The really extreme version of this is Joseph Stalin enacting the industrial plan of inputs and outputs into a giant math formula, and the factory is supposed to perfectly yield the outputs that are determined by its inputs. That's
the one of the moments in time that I think about it as a kind of great example is in 2007, the iPhone is released. Mm-hmm. And I'm an Apple super nerd. I literally have video of me waiting in line
standing at the store
at the Short Hills Mall in New Jersey for the first iPhone. I paid $6.99.
Yeah.
That was the price out of the gate. This is Apple, which is already now a big company, the big successful company because of the iPod. We kind of forget that there was a period where Apple actually almost died.
Yeah.
But within 2 months, they had to drop the price to $4.99 because they ran out of people very quick, like me. You could say suckers or early adopters or whatever, but people who were like, I'm willing to pay $700 for this touchscreen phone thing. So the Colossus Apple had to cut the price by a third.
They had to be price responsive to their consumers.
So how did that? So that's like, well, wait, well, what does that have to do with what you paid the people? Because if what you paid the people is supposed to add up to the value, but you're not in control of the value.
That's exactly either because every transaction there are two parties. There's a consumer and there's a producer, and they have to meet in the exchange. And in some ways, the consumer is the sovereign entity because the consumer can always say, "No, I don't want that at that price."
Right, I can always just walk. It's like I don't need the iPhone.
Yeah.
My flip phone's fine.
Exactly.
I'll keep my Palm Pilot.
That's exactly it.
So did Marx not contend with the fact that the buyer of finished goods is not is not like a robot, but actually will like
Has some choice in there.
Like if they go into this baker and they're charging too much for bread, I'm not going to buy it.
So it doesn't really figure into his paradigm in any sensible way because he's dealing in groups, he's dealing in collectives, he's dealing in aggregates. And one of his ways to try to get around this, this labor pricing issue, he essentially says, okay, well, maybe the particulars of the math of individual exchanges aren't going to work, but if we add them all up together and economy-wide or something, it'll supposedly work out. Well, it turns out that doesn't either.
So you've got basically a recognition at every level, theoretically, mathematically, empirically, his system, his core assumptions, his central premise doesn't work.
Yeah.
It cannot work.
And this is scientific mechanism is broken. It's on the rocks.
And as I understand the scientific method, it is that you put forward a hypothesis, you test the hypothesis, and it doesn't get to become a law until it's proven. And even then, it's still provisional because you might realize, like, oh, well, actually, this only works in certain circumstances.
Right.
But it doesn't work in any circumstances.
Yeah, you put it in the vacuum of space and something else happens.
So this is all before the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. So is it just like Lenin is like off in weirdo land reading books that are dusty?
Basically.
How does this happen?
Lenin is this political radical. He's from Russia. He is exiled, sent to prison, all sorts of things. He's just like a disruptor. He is constantly protesting, but he's on the fringes of society, and he eventually gets exiled into Switzerland. It's like one of the only places that would take him. And he's sitting there writing pamphlets. Now, Lenin is a divisive figure even among commie world, even among the socialists. So other Marxists in this era are not in the Lenin main line of Marxism, if you want to consider that. So the heirs and descendants of Engels is Marx's like literary curator. Then Engels dies in the 1890s. He passes off the papers and the editing project of his great inspiration to a figure by the name of Karl Kautsky. Who's kind of this, he's now obscure today, but if you read him, he edited all these volumes of Marx's unpublished papers in the 1890s through the 1910s. But Kautsky was involved in something that was much more like a social democracy version of socialism. There are other figures in that. Edward Bernstein is one of them, is a German politician that's associated with Marxism. He starts as a Marxist, and he would still call himself that at the end. But these are people that are all realizing, wait a minute, this revolutionary stuff, this rise up and seize the means of production, it's not working out the way that Marx predicted. Now, we're not ready to abandon Marx because we still care about the worker and we believe in some of his political objectives. But their version of Marxism starts to get kind of watered down. The Bernstein revisionist version of him looks like a pro-labor social democrat platform that promises shorter hours, better factory conditions, health care for the workers, that kind of thing.
So he basically becomes a social democrat / progressive type.
Essentially.
Okay.
And this is kind of the main line of where Marxist theory is going. And notice they had to jettison the really radical Paris Commune, let's rise up and seize the means of production and kill the bourgeois, wink nod.
So how does then? So then, did you trace a direct line from these people who pick up the mantle and immediately start to say, well, not really, but we liked him, but not really.
Yeah.
How does it end up with Lenin? How does Lenin? Do we know exactly how Lenin ends up getting on the Marx train?
Yeah. So he's a radical. He's an interpreter of Marx himself. He starts publishing pamphlets, probably late 1890s, early 1900s, at the turn of the century. But he's on the radical wing of this whole Marxist movement, the majority tend to be like these social democrat types, the reformers, of various degrees. And there are these battles that are playing out internal to what's called the Second International. This is the successor organization to Marxist and socialist world that Engels has set up with a few of these other figures at the time. And the internal battles to the Second International, they have the Lenin faction, was like the really extreme fringe. Then you have kind of this more mainline, moderated Marxist faction that's kind of starting to see problems with his predictions, but still likes the political program. World War I blows this up because the war breaks out, and even the socialist factions, they start aligning with whatever their home country was doing. So there's a socialist faction in Germany, Social Democratic Party there, and the majority of the party throws its weight behind the German nation in the war.
Okay.
And you see this playing out across all these, every country. It depends on what side of the war you're on. Well, you root for the home team, including the socialists, except for the really extreme Leninist radical wing. And they're saying, no, we are an international organization. And he kind of seizes that as his moment. He's saying, look, all these watered down versions of Marxism, the social democracy stuff that was emerging prior to this war, they've shown their true colors. We're the real radicals. We're the true heirs of Marx. And he starts writing all these pamphlets out of Switzerland. But he's still in exile.
Is he exiled by the czars? Is that like so? Is there there's these two things going on? It seems like straight through to today.
Yeah.
There's I look at my society and I see things that feel unjust. I see people with power who abuse others. I see people that appear to have a lot and didn't earn it, in my estimation, versus people who are our fellow man that have nothing. And how can you have so much while you have so little?
Right.
Which is a completely reasonable concern.
Yeah.
And then the question is, well, what should be done about this? What should be done?
And that is the title of Lenin's famous pamphlet. Although it wasn't famous at the time. This is like a guy running an internet manifesto, a Unabomber manifesto, and throwing it out there. It's famous in hindsight because what it inspires. And this comes about through Joseph Schumpeter, the great historian of economics and economist in his own right, refers to the events of 1917 as one of the great flukes of history. And what comes about, so remember, Lenin's exiled in Switzerland. Yep. The war has taken a new turn because it's a two-front war. Germany is facing like England and France on the west, and then Russia on the east. Russia is collapsing through all sorts of political mismanagement. The Tsar's regime is falling on its own. And this starts to happen in early 1917. The Tsar abdicates. It's not the Bolsheviks. It's a previous, earlier revolution of other, and it just comes from the dysfunction of Russian society, a lack of a will in the war. The troops weren't getting fed. Things are collapsing.
Yeah. So just is it the Romanovs? My knowledge here is pretty spotty.
Tsar Nicholas II, the Romanov family, and this happens when the monarchy is collapsing. He says, all right, we are going to abdicate. We'll retire to our palace. You go do your thing.
And who's you? Somebody else is stepping up.
So they set up a provisional government, and it has some elements of democratic socialist. It has some elements of people that want to return to the monarchy. It's kind of this. It's a weak, large beast of a government that isn't really on a good constitutional footing. It's disrupted, but they're still fighting the war. They're still at battle with Germany. And Germany says, we have a moment here. Russia's in disarray politically, even though they're still on the field fighting us. Let's throw a hand grenade into the middle of that. And the hand grenade is, we're going to go look at all these exiles of the old Tsarist regime, the radicals, the rabble, the Lenins, and there are plenty of others, people that had been kicked out of there because they were just political disruptors. And let's round them up, and we're going to give them a free train ticket into St. Petersburg.
So Lenin is literally a German Molotov cocktail to try to destroy Russia.
Yes.
During World War I.
To take them out of the war. That way Germany could focus all of its efforts on the West this battle with Britain and France, and of course the United States enters in on that side. But they thought we can win a one-front war. We cannot sustain this further in a two-front war. So what they do is that Lenin's one of these guys they scoop up out of exile in Switzerland. They give him passage on a train, a sealed train. It goes through Germany, transits the territory because, middle of a war, otherwise you get papers, please, at every border. They say, we're going to pretend that's not going to happen. Let him through. He enters into St. Petersburg and immediately does what he does. He starts organizing the fringes, the Bolshevik faction.
I didn't realize this, and I'm just processing this for a second.
Yeah.
So you've got Germany under pressure.
Yep.
They're like, who are the worst people we could possibly send back into our enemy that would really just destroy the place? And they look at this pamphlet. This will blow the place up.
Yeah, exactly.
What shall be done? What shall be done is destroy Russia. Awesome.
Yeah, and take them out of the war, and then we win. So that's the whole thinking there.
I mean, it backfires so spectacularly in retrospect, even for the Germans.
This is why someone like Schumpeter will say this is a fluke. Isaiah Berlin, the great political theorist of the 20th century, he basically says, by this chance event that happened in 1917, it changed the entire century. And no one really predicted that it was going to be this way. They really didn't understand what kind of a rabble-rouser Lenin was. It's not that Lenin has like masses behind him. He's always a minority faction. So he arrives in Russia in the middle of 1917, starts organizing, finds all of his old friends and the Bolsheviks, gets them together, and is like, all right, we need to wait for our moment and seize up and strike. And he's a very unscrupulous character because remember, the end game is he wants revolutionary Marxism. This is a guy that idolizes Marx, has been like making pilgrimages to Marx's grave in London for years, and thinks he's the true inheritor of the Marxist system that's going to restore it to its revolutionary glory.
But did he bathe? Because if he really wanted to be a real Marxist, he should have foregone all forms of personal hygiene.
Yeah, there are interesting theories of. So Lenin dies relatively young.
Maybe he didn't. Yeah. Maybe he was like, I should be covered in horrendous boils, just like
Karl Marx, live in filth, and He's a character in that respect, but a fanatic. And what he's doing, he's arrived in Russia. The Kerensky government, this interim government that's emerged after the first revolution, that's deposed the czar. It's trying to govern itself. Everything's a big mess. It's a weak government, and it's kind of dilly-dallying over what to do about the war. They know the war's unpopular, but they also don't want to leave it because the save face, that kind of a whole thing is playing out. And then there's all these factions internal to the Russian political scene. What it means is that there's no real strength of the government to preserve and take itself if a bad opportunity emerges.
You're using two terms I want to understand how you think of. Like, what do you mean by them? Weak and strong.
Yeah.
So what does it mean for the government to be weak?
It has a constitutional order that's really not settled. There are questions of legitimacy. Remember, it's deposed this multi-hundred-year reign of a czar that was assumed to have power from God.
Yeah.
And suddenly that's no more, and we're trying to set up a constitution, and we don't really know if the people that are writing the constitution are truly representatives of this massive nation that covers an entire continent. They really haven't had true elections yet. So it's weak as in the support among the public is uncertain and could just collapse at any moment. Right.
And so if they make too big of a move, any move could be the one that undoes them and people storm the gates and they're out.
That's exactly it.
Okay.
It upsets the status quo. The new status quo was a very tenuous one.
Yeah, there's not broad consensus. Yeah. It's not like... Now, how do you think about the nature of minority revolutions?
Yeah.
Because they seem to always go that way, including the American one.
Oh, absolutely.
As I understand it, most historians will say, like people like Gordon Wood, God rest his soul, who just passed away, that, only at most a third of the colonists were in favor
right.
of leaving the crown.
Right.
And so so it's like, well, wait a second. Does that mean like the American Revolution was illegitimate?
Right. Right.
Or is it just that most people living their lives don't have the time to concern themselves with that? And so it's like how do you think about that dynamic? How could a fringe character like Robespierre or Lenin or Thomas Jefferson overturn a society?
Yeah, and we take the good example, like the American Revolution. Yeah, it's roughly a third, and maybe a little bit less than a third is adamant loyalists. And then the remainder are just kind of like ambivalent. It's like, all right, I want to live my life. I'm going to side eventually with what. So the big contest comes over. How do you get that middle? Do you sway them over to your ideas through persuasion, through offering something better, or do you sway them under your ideas by gunpoint? And Lenin definitely does the latter. So he waits for his moment. This is the October Revolution. They're on a different calendar, so it's like October, November, depending on which calendar you're in, 1917. He waits for a moment of weakness in the Kerensky government, and then he strikes.
And what does that look like exactly? What is that strike?
It's taking guns and seizing control of buildings. They actually seize control of a warship, so that they convert the crew of a warship that's sitting there in St. Petersburg, part of the Baltic fleet. And there's actually documents from the Bolsheviks that say, well, where's the Bolshevik operation located? It's on the Baltic fleet. It's sitting there with guns, and they turn them on the city. And then they send their troops out and they seize the bridges of the city, and they turn other troops out and they seize government buildings at moments when there's kind of chaos and disarray in the official government that has replaced the czar. And they're really kind of caught off guard. And it comes down to there's a bunch of mistakes that are made by this provisional government on how to respond to the crazy people that are now turning their guns on them. And, word goes out to the countryside because, this is St. Petersburg. The rest of Russia is very much not in the mix of this, not even in Moscow yet.
Right. And it's like you've still got fundamentally an overwhelmingly agrarian society in like the pre-modern communications era.
Yeah.
So you're just, most of the population's like on their small lot farming. They don't know that the gunships are pointed at the capital by crazy people.
Exactly. So they storm in and they succeed because Lenin is really ruthless. He's like, yes, we are going to take the city this time. We are going to do whatever it takes. Now, the other mix of it, there was already an election scheduled in Russia under this provisional government to take place in, I think it was early November is when the voting started. Of course, it's across the continent, so it's a much slower than, hey, everyone show up on election day. But this, it was to elect, they referred to as the Russian Constituent Assembly. And it was supposed to be the organizing body, quasi-legislative, to set out what this new society, this new government would look like. It was already scheduled before the Bolshevik Revolution occurs. The Bolsheviks take the capital in late October or early November, depending on which calendar you're on. Then the election starts. The election, Lenin's party runs, the Bolsheviks. But there are all sorts of other factions, including there's like a less bad socialist faction.
The Mensheviks, or are they part of that?
It's all these little factions that we know about. The election plays out. His party finishes a distant second. So the Constituent Assembly meets in January, and then they elect the leader of one of the opposition parties as the chair of the assembly. They put together, there's enough of a coalition. The Bolsheviks are not in control according to this election that had already been set. And Lenin's like, okay, enough of that. We're going to send our troops in. They shut it down.
Did they kill everybody? What do they do?
They exiled most. So the leader of the opposition, he basically flees. He ends up in the United States eventually. And dies like in New York City in a little apartment. So it's, but once they've shut that down, like it convenes, and like within 24 hours, like this isn't going our way. We have the force, we have the guns, not going to happen. And then they revised the history. They said, well, really the majority party that won, there was a left-wing faction that wanted to side with the Bolsheviks, so we claim legitimacy anyway, even though we lost.
So you have a large society that had lived for generations under this czarist monarchy.
Yeah.
And now you've got murderous lunatics
With guns
in charge of it, but it's still fundamentally a small number of people compared to the total population. What do they have to do to keep masses from just storming the gates and being like, well, you're monsters and we don't want you. We just got out from under the czars who were less monstrous than you, obviously. Well, what do they do? What do they do next?
This is the fluke measure. This is why Schumpeter says that this is an accident of history. They exploit the weaknesses of all the other different factions. Russia basically breaks out into a giant civil war. Plays out for the next several years. So, Lenin has the guns and he has the capital. And he has access to parts of the fleet, and he has arms. He also makes moves to negotiate. Okay, we're going to come to a peace with Germany. We'll end that part of the war. So that is a mechanism to gain him some popularity. He also gestures toward these various worker interests and collective interests across the countryside, says, we're the people that are going to save you. So he tries to build popularity that way. But they often discover pretty quickly that what Lenin is promising them does not really align with their own interest. And in fact, when they challenge Lenin, he sends in his troops and he shoots them.
As I understand it, there's a romance about Lenin, even relative to Stalin, who comes next and then proceeds to, rain down his particular terror.
That Stalin is like a deviation from what Lenin could have been had Lenin only lived a little longer.
So for people who have romantic visions of these things, like Hassan Piker, who has been seen sitting with his $5,000 watches and Gucci suits, reading what should be done in the back of an Uber X, Uber XL. What's going on there? What is the story that is being told by people today about Lenin versus the brutality of Stalin? And because that all sounds pretty brutal, but maybe that's like, oh, well, no, that's just war. War's brutal.
Yeah, so the narrative is that Stalin betrayed the true Lenin vision, which was also the true Marx vision, if you're a real Leninist type. That's the story they tell themselves. And because Lenin dies young, he's in his 50s, he's disease-ridden at the very end of his life. We've all seen the picture of him sitting there in a wheelchair, and he looks like a corpse. But Stalin seizes and consolidates power, and then the revolution goes off the wrong trajectory. Then Stalin, very famously, kills tens of millions of people. There's a massive famine. There's forced collectivization. There are gulags and death camps.
Liquidating the kulaks in Ukraine and all the rest of the heinous mass murder.
So that's like taking one of the worst mass murderers of all time. Stalin killed tens of millions of people. Well, how do we compare the record of Lenin? Well, Lenin killed a couple million. Lenin himself was personally ruthless. There's an earlier famine during the middle of the Civil War that's induced by Lenin's ideas. It just isn't as big or bad as the Ukrainian one a decade and a half later.
Yeah, is it the case? If I remember correctly, maybe I'm misremembering this. There is a very immediate attempt to try to do like full communistic, collective farming, and it immediately backfires, right?
It completely backfires. And remember, this is, Lenin he claims he's the true heir of Marx. If you read Marx's writing about where he thinks the revolution is going to occur, he says it's going to be in a modern industrial economy like Germany. Russia, that's a backwater. That's a backward society. They aren't even out of the agrarian phase yet. They're barely past the stage of serfdom. Quite literally. It's going to take a while for Russia to get there. And Lenin is saying, no, we can sidestep that. We have to slightly modify Marx, even though I'm the true heir of Marx, and I figured out how his system's going to be implemented. We can do it in Russia.
There's a couple things that I have read in Lenin that are striking to me, and that we incorporated into the lyrics of the rap video, actually.
Yeah.
So one is he believed that you could organize the society like the post office.
Yeah.
He actually he wrote that, like, oh no, we know how to manage a society It's called the post office.
Right.
So what's he talking about there? Because for most people, they're not going to know. Like,
Yeah.
wait, what? Like, what are you?
Well, the post office is a giant network that gets pieces of paper from one end of the country to another end of the country somehow through organized distribution networks. And he's like, oh, yeah, post office sounds innocuous. Everyone likes it. A package comes in the mail. It's doing a service to me.
That's the whole economy then.
That's the whole economy then. But what you really get is instead of like packages coming in the mail, you have troops showing up with guns and saying, follow my rule or else off to the camp or we're going to disappear you and send you to the side of the road.
The other element, and I believe it is in What Should Be Done.
Yeah.
But I might be maybe it's a different piece of his writing, is that essentially he acknowledges what we've already talked about, that these ideas, Marx, radical socialism, they come out of the intelligentsia, they come out of the educated classes, and essentially the masses are kind of too stupid to know what's up, and we need a vanguard of people like me to show the rest of these rubes what an awesome utopia we're going to have, and we can't rely on these people. So the man of the people, socialism is about we the people, isn't in the writings of any of these people. It's like, no, the people are stupid.
Right. But we have figured it out.
But we know because we're the educated elite.
Yeah.
And we're going to cram this down their throats, and then they'll have like a change of consciousness. And I know later thinkers
they call it the false consciousness of the worker.
Well, you think your conditions are better, 1950s American worker, but they're not. You're just an idiot convinced by Madison Avenue and Edward Bernays that you're better off than you are.
Yeah. And this is a deep strain. It actually does go back into Marx raging against consumerism, but also 19th century anti-capitalism. They think consumer goods are like the distraction for the masses to keep them placated. Because, Marx has figured out the scientific progression of history, and if it's not happening, that must mean something is intruding to cause it to not to happen.
You got these new ballpoint pens.
Yeah.
You're too excited to get rid of your quills, and that's why you're not revolting, because you got this cool new thing.
Exactly. And so the roots of this,
there's a certain amount of truth to that up to a point, right? It's like even Adam Smith, I think, talks about being obsessed with gadgets and and not
gadgets are cool.
Yeah,
they're fun.
Being like new iPhone in the spring, in the fall. So I don't want to have a revolution because I want to get the next version of iOS installed on my phone before the revolution.
Right. And that's kind of the thinking. But someone like Marx is. Well, this is a distraction. But you see the roots of this. It's in the manifesto. So go back to 1848. When these revolutions are breaking out across Europe, and Marx, of course, is trying to shoehorn them into his own system, even though there are all sorts of different causes. One of the points he makes in the manifesto is that the workers really don't know their own interests, even though we figured it out for them. Therefore, you need the Communist Party, i.e. me and my buddy Engels, to lead them. We're the vanguard. And Lenin takes it. So Marx hints in this direction, and it comes through some of his later works. Like, we are the people to show the workers their true interest, to break them out of their false consciousness is basically the argument. And Lenin's like, yeah, I'm really going to operationalize that. I am indeed the vanguard, and we're going to do it by force.
So through this accident of history, you have this sort of radical, on the fringe exile that is sent back into his home country by Germany for the express purposes of destroying it.
Yeah.
And he succeeds in taking power because of this mix of things that all converge. You've got this unpopular war, this weak provisional government, and then his willingness to take command of the guns and just do what needs to be done to hold on to power ruthlessly. Hayek writes about why the worst get on top.
And he is definitely among the worst.
Yeah, it's like, hey, if you centralize enough power, the person willing to slit your throat or stab you in the back or the front will do it. And if you're not willing to do that, then you don't survive. And that's kind of built into the logic of the system.
Absolutely is. Yeah.
There's a character, I believe his name is Buchanan. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah.
Who's more soft.
Right.
And this is in the post-Lenin era, right? Talk about him, because I know there are socialists who say, no. the accident of history is that the bad guys like Stalin took over instead of the good guys like Buchanan. And if Buchanan had taken over,
it would have gone differently.
It would be great.
Or Trotsky is another.
Or Trotsky. Or like, look, Yugoslavia wasn't quite so bad. Right. They had communism, but it wasn't quite so horrible. So again, it's like the real communism's never been tried because there's these other people we've plucked out of history who had their throats slit or exiled. So talk a little bit about these other characters before we talk about Marx today.
And it's part of it's like rehabilitating the message, because these guys were, on the line with Lenin, ready to use the guns when Lenin is using the guns. Trotsky is like one of his military commanders and actually tries to spread the revolution into Eastern Europe. This is why, the Soviet Union is much bigger than just Russia proper. It's because they spread out and they take over places like Ukraine. Yeah. They tried to invade Poland and they're defeated at the Battle of Warsaw and turned back. So these are very ruthless, militarily aggressive people that are trying to continue the revolution and spread it into Europe more broadly, but they're turned back. But because Stalin purges them, they are now the victims. Stalin emerges and outmaneuvers them and remains, rises to the top. And if they stayed behind in Russia, they got sent to the camp and eventually killed. Or if they exiled, they fled elsewhere. So Trotsky moves to Mexico City. Well, in 1940, Stalin sends an assassin to just off him in his house.
Marx is still otherwise a sort of defunct, also ran of this like vanguard of socialist writers whose system of thought has been completely overturned by a better understanding of the nature of value.
Yeah.
So how does he end up in every single college classroom? How does he end up being the most read? Because that's right, isn't it? First, set the table for today. It's 2026. Yeah. How should I understand the scope and the breadth of Marx being read by our kids in college today?
So, you have your core canon of the works that everyone encounters. And we think of Shakespeare's in that, Plato, Aristotle, John Locke, the Federalist Papers, Martin Luther King, all of these figures that to be a well-educated person in society, you should read. And Karl Marx is now considered among one of those. But if you look at the frequency at which they are assigned, the single most commonly assigned philosophical text, so set aside the grammar manual and the algebra book that everyone has to do.
Yeah.
But if you stick thinkers, philosophers, Karl Marx is always on like the number 1 or 2 on the list in U.S. university syllabi today. There are all sorts of measures and tracking projects. Now we have AI that scrapes this stuff off the internet. We can know which books are assigned. Karl Marx is often number 1 or number 2. He sometimes jockeys with Plato as the second. But then like someone like Adam Smith or John Locke or the Federalist Papers, they're assigned at roughly half the rate of Karl Marx. So he is very clearly not just in the canon, he is at the very top of the canon of what is taught today.
I believe this is not as true in economics as it is in the not economics.
And that's the other interesting thing. Karl Marx, he titles Das Kapital, the subtitle is it's a critique of political economy. He wrote it for the economists, to attack the economists. He's trying to upend economics as a discipline. That's where he considers his home. And yet he's an afterthought in economics classes. He is taught, he's read only as a component of the history of economic thought. There are very, very few serious Marxist economists that actually still believe this stuff, mainly because it's obsolete. It's been debunked. It would be like the miasma theory of germs taught in medical school.
Yeah, there's that was like I'll mispronounce this, like the the phlogiston, the theory of fire. It's like that's not how fire works.
Yeah, or the epicycle theory of the planets.
So basically, you have like degenerate backwaters, like the New School's economics department, which are just like a joke to anyone that knows anything about economics. But it exists, and you've got like Richard Wolff barking at his students about, whatever. To Clapter. But everywhere else, it's like, nah, none of this works.
None of this
it's
works.
useful. It doesn't predict anything. It doesn't align with anything we observe in human behavior. We don't use this.
Yeah. And that's the state of Marxist economics basically since the turn of the 20th century. So I always use it as kind of an example. Thomas Nixon Carver, he's this economist at Harvard. So top of the field. He's kind of obscure today, but he was like one of the main guys in the Harvard department for decades. And the interesting thing about him, even though he's a free market-ish kind of guy, certainly has absorbed the marginal revolution, he's mainstream of that era, but he taught the one class on socialist economics from like the 1890s through about 1920 or so. This is the era we're talking. And they offer, it's like an upper level elective if you want to study socialist economics, and they'd read Rodbertus, Lassalle, Marx, all these texts just to figure out what it meant.
Yeah.
It's like a historical exercise. Well, Carver publishes this article, it's about 1920, 21, right after, as the Russian Civil War is playing out, and Lenin's in there. And he says, this Lenin guy has like breathed new life into this old defunct theory. And he goes through step by step. He says, what do we know is the status of Marx in economics? Number one, his theory of surplus value has been debunked. This is antiquated. The labor theory of value is gone. We've known this for almost 50 years now. Number two, his theory of history, this historical materialism, not even other socialists believe this nonsense. Number three, all of his predictions about the immiseration of the worker and the trajectory of industrial economies, none of them came through. Number 4, 5, 6, he goes point by point by point, says all the major claims of Marx are wrong. This is why we do not treat Marxian economics as like a subfield of economics.
Anthropology, history, sociology are infused with this. Critical theory.
Yep.
Which is birthed out of legal departments.
Yes. Yeah.
Is infused with this. The people who construct our current intersectionality, where you get points for how many different not white male things you have. That's all basically put forward by people who just say outright they are Marxists.
Absolutely. Where does that come from?
How does that happen? How does that happen when the guys, when you have a guy who's basically like fundamentally discredited in his core ideas?
So this is the point that I'm making. It drives them crazy when I put, in one way or another, they are all children of Lenin. Every one of them. Some of them will disavow Lenin, and this comes from later permutations of the Marxist system. Marxists are like, remember the Monty Python, the People's Front of Judea versus the People's Judean Front, in The Life of Brian. Marxists are like that. It's like the critical theory Marxist says, we're not the People's Judean Front, we're the People's Front of Judea. And then the Orthodox Marxists, no, they're not true Marxists, we're the true Marxists. And there are hundreds of these little camps and factions, and they all hate each other.
So it's all the Spider-Man pointing at Spider-Man, but it's Lenin.
Lenin pointing at Lenin, and maybe he's pointing at Herbert Marcuse, who's pointing at Adorno, who's pointing at Althusser,
and all the rest of these people.
It's that kind of stuff. So, yes, there are hundreds of these little weird factions in Marxism, and they hate each other, but they all also agree on 99% of the things. They all hate capitalism. It's just a different route to get there, but they all claim to be the true interpreter of Marx, and everyone else is not. So, where does that come from? Well, one of Lenin's programs, remember, he's establishing himself by force at gunpoint to get his political power.
Yeah.
But he is a true believer, and part of this vanguard theory is one of the tasks that the vanguard representative agent has is to educate the masses, to break them out of their false consciousness. And to do that, you have to teach them Marx. You have to instruct them in Marx. This is a really interesting insight because it was happened upon by a Marxist historian that's done some of the best work documenting it, Eric Hobsbawm. He's a British Marxist historian, true believer, truest of true believer, and he studies, he's a decent historian in some respects, but he's clearly ideological, he's clearly fanatically attached to Marx. But one of the areas he studies, like Philip Foner, who studied Marx's funeral, Hobsbawm looks at the publication records of Das Kapital and the Capitals and the Communist Manifesto and all these other pamphlets that Marx and his heirs published in the late 19th century. And he asks the question, how did these get out to the world? And he digs in the publication records and he finds the print runs are like 1,200 copies or 1,500 copies here or there. Or, oh, here's a new translation into Russia. It sold 1,000 copies. Though the German Social Democratic Party declared that Marx was part of their platform, they ran 5,000 copies over the course of 10 years. And he's asked the question, well, this is not popularizing Marx. Maybe he's the high theorist of these left-wing groups, or one of the high theorists. But his work is really not getting out there, and he really can't find much in the way of counterexamples. But Hobsbawm comes up to this discovery. He notices when Lenin seizes power, one of the other things he does, in addition to guns going around and consolidating, he orders the Soviet state to take its treasury and mass produce pamphlets of Marx, and to put them in the classroom, and to subsidize teaching and instruction in Marx, to, as the vanguard agent, be the person that awakens that class consciousness and properly train society in the doctrines of Marx so that they know their role and they know they're part of it, and it all makes sense to them now. And then this is the positive side of the propaganda. It goes even so far, Lenin commissions scholars to go into Europe and dig in the old archives and find Marx's papers that have not been published. So they do that in the 1920s. David Ryazanov is the commissioned editor. He hooks up with this thing called the Frankfurt School that's founded in the early 1920s. It's the Western Marxist branch, which weirdly, it was kind of anti-Leninist. They thought Lenin was too aggressive and too authoritarian in some respects, although they would always give an homage to him. They'd say, well, Lenin reawakened Marxism, so I guess we credit him for that, even though he's not doing... But
so it's just the arriving at utopia and/or hell, fast or slow, seems to be the question with a lot of these groups, right?
It is.
So the Frankfurt School, we're going to go a little slower, march through the institutions,
and we're going to do it on cultural margins. We're like musicologists. Adorno's a musicologist, or we're literary theorists, and we're going to work in all these fields that this is ripe turf for them to claim, because Marx is debated in economics. And he's defeated in economics.
Yeah,
that's where the locus of the discussion is before 1917. Economists, the consensus of the discipline, this stuff doesn't work. He's basically non-existent in law or in literature. They wouldn't. A literature professor in 1905 would have no clue who Karl Marx was, or even care. They'd be like, "Why is this weird economic theorist even relevant to me? I study Shakespeare." Right. And that's kind of intuitive. But you go into the literature department today, they're all Marxists, and the only way they study Shakespeare is by putting them through a Marxist lens. It's a really weird inversion of that. But what this does, it's like all this ripe, unconquered turf to pick up Marxism. And, academia has always been kind of left to center. So Lenin throws all these state resources into churning out scholarship on Marx. They dig up every scrap of paper, every spare receipt, every letter to Engels begging for money, and there are hundreds of those.
Begging for money and ignoring the fact that Engels' love of his life dies. And Engels is like, come on, man, I just lost my love and you're just asking me for money? You're such a jerk. It's horrible.
It's a glorious exchange. Yeah, this actually happens. Lenin's girlfriend passes away suddenly from illness.
Or Engels.
Engels' girlfriend passes away suddenly from an illness, and he writes to Marx, he's like, I'm in despair, my girlfriend just died, and Marx is like, I understand your despair because of my economic condition. You know what would make you feel a lot better about it? If you send me a check. It's like my allowance payment hasn't arrived this month. This kind of there's just multiple examples of this. Yeah. But yeah, so you got that going on. It's this enterprise that takes off. So Lenin seizes power. He's like, I'm going to take the Soviet treasury. Mm-hmm. We're going to run everything we can find of Marx. We're going to dig up his throwaway pamphlets and his throwaway notebooks. These are early parts of his theories that Marx himself discards. He thinks, oh, maybe I'm going down the wrong track. Because Marx only publishes Das Kapital. It's the finished product of years and years of going over notes. And he veers off in ideas that he later rejects. Lenin's like, no, every scrap of paper has exegesis to be done on it.
So it begs the question. So if we as we sit here and say, okay, the factual history of the matter is Marx's economics doesn't work. He is rejected. Radical lunatic takes over, propagandizes his society, but then pushes it out to the broader world.
Yeah.
Why is the broader world receptive?
Yeah.
Why does all of American academia, whose existence stands in contrast to Marx itself?
Yeah.
Again, like
Yeah.
we have been the most free enterprise society broadly.
Yeah.
We have the highest standard of living of anyone in human history. And if you just look objectively at where do the people at the bottom live the best in absolute material terms on a spectrum
The
of
free societies.
everything's on a spectrum, right? Nothing's perfect. We don't have like an anarcho-capitalist utopia on one hand or a pure stateless, moneyless, classless society. We have a spectrum where America's here, maybe like Singapore and Hong Kong used to be a little even further than us. Switzerland is up there. Actually, so is Sweden, by the way.
Yeah.
And then over here, you got, Cambodia in the 1970s and North Korea, who now, of course, it's like, oh, North Korea's economy is booming because of arms sales or something.
Right.
It's like, but the people over here at the bottom, the poorest of the poor, our poor have an excess of calories.
Yeah.
Our poor aren't, it's like, it sucks to be poor. It sucks to be poor in America. We have homeless on the street. I'm not trying to minimize that.
Yeah, exactly.
But just as a matter of being an objective person, you can't look at the scope of history and say Marxism is good for the working class. There's no evidence.
Right.
So if you're an academic in anthropology, in Harvard in 2026, and you call yourself a Marxist, I can blame Lenin for propagandizing you.
Yeah.
But it's still your fault. So how did that happen? Why?
Yeah.
Why is there so much uptake?
Yes.
Are they all corrupt? Are they all on the take by the Confucian centers?
So I don't think there's any conspiracy behind it, but this is the Hayek points this out in this great little essay from 1949 on socialism, why it is attractive to the intellectuals. And he has a couple observations. He says, first off, never and nowhere has a socialist revolution been truly a workers' movement from the bottom up. It's always the educated elite, the intellectuals, and by intellectual he means that pejoratively, second-hand dealers of ideas that have picked up something from somewhere else that looks appealing. So you have this perfect storm coming together. Lenin seized power, and he's decided to spread Marx everywhere with all the treasury of the Soviet state and willing collaborators in other countries that maybe they don't like Lenin himself, but hey, there's money coming in to put Marx pamphlets in print.
In the U.S., you absolutely have non-trivial swaths of Hollywood being funded, organizations strewn across Hollywood, funded by the Soviet Union.
They're absolutely. There's this thing called Progress Publishers that's set up in Moscow, and it's basically translate everything of Marx and just spread it out across the world.
Yeah.
Oh, these books
Joe
are
McCarthy was basically correct.
In some respects on that, yes, there's an absolute propaganda entity operating out of the Soviet Union. From the beginning, Lenin wanted this. He ordered it. That's there. So the intellectuals now have access to them. What it does, it crowds out all of the other fanciful socialist theorists. On the eve of the Russian Revolution, in English language citations, Henry George, who's this late 19th century reformer, and he's a mixed figure. There's a classical liberal version of him, but there's also a socialist version of him. Henry George was cited at a higher rate than Karl Marx. It flips overnight after the Russian Revolution.
And Henry George is more interesting in so many ways.
Absolutely.
He's, as I understand it, I'm not deeply read on George, but I know he looks at essentially this property, this land question. We have this thing, we're born onto the earth. Our claims to land are always going to be sort of provisional to the broader reality of shared creation, or there's different ways to think about it, but we should tax the land, basically.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to.
If we're going to tax something, we should tax the land.
Yeah. So it's the argument I make. Lenin is the tipping point that makes Marx the king socialist. You have this big amorphous movement that's emerged of hundreds of little factions. There are Rodbertians, Lassalleans, Georgists, Proudhonites, you name it. And Marx is in competition with them in his life to be the dominant in the fringe. And then after his life, they're still fighting their battles. Lenin tips the balance of power to where Marx is now the only socialist game in town. The rest of these are like obscure things that fade off into weird little corners of academia at best.
And this is where I recognize that I have tended to increasingly be like a grumpy old man on this. Mm-hmm. All of these distinctions that get made today between socialists, democratic socialists, such, I scratch them, and they're all Marx. So I'm inclined to say they're all a bunch of commies in the end.
Right.
And I know it's like, oh, no, you... And I have a cousin, actually, who's... we do battle intellectually on a lot of fronts. And he will be the one... He's a lawyer. So he will get lawyerly about it all.
Yeah.
Am I just being unfair? Is there a broader texture of the socialist tradition that has things to offer? Or at the end of the day, are the fundamental claims all ultimately pretty similar, and you tack on democratic, and that's all just a scam?
Well, I think the 19th century version, there were some socialists that were truly interested in reform. They're like, the factory conditions are bad. So let's get elected to the legislature, and we're going to pass laws that require you to have like occupational safety. Some of them are saying, well, the opportunities for the poor are bad. Let's pass laws and subsidize public education. Debate those policies, but they were well-meaning and they thought they could do it through the democratic mechanisms. The problem is democratic mechanisms become very weak when the other side has guns. And that's what Lenin really exploits. And the other factor of this, so when Marx crowds out these kind of more peaceful socialist traditions, I don't believe their economics are right. So Rodbertus is a surplus value theorist. He's still wrong about surplus value, although he's the best representation of surplus value that we have. This is why Marx hated him, because Rodbertus was always saying, you plagiarized me. And there's actually some evidence that did occur. Engels sent Rodbertus's book to Marx in 1851 and says, check out this guy. Put the pieces together. So Marx crowds out all these other socialists and becomes the king socialist in the wake of Lenin. But then you have all these derivative traditions. So the intellectuals, as Hayek points out, they're always drawn to these fanciful ideas, and they rally around Marx like, the Soviet Union is going to usher in the new age of humanity. And you have these Western intellectuals, they travel to Moscow in the 1920s, and they're like, we're here to see the future. They're all entranced by it. And then Stalin happens, and things start going pretty badly.
As we sit here today, we have a self-avowed, vocal, democratic socialist mayor, Zoran Mamdani, and now another one in Washington, in Seattle, Katie Wilson. And we've now, it appears as we sit here right now, are just like looking at dueling socialists for Los Angeles. Particularly Mamdani, who I've done a lot of videos on. I mean, he just talks about seizing the means of production. He talks about the abolition of private property. He's put people into his administration, like this Sia Cleaver. I think that one. I might be misremembering exactly how to pronounce her name. This
is the one that was on the video.
Talking about how, we're going to ultimately abolish private property, particularly for white people, of course, because it's all racialized in ways that, forget what a heinous, horrible racist Marx was.
There's another,
right? It's like, go back and read the guy, because on the race front,
he's not
heinous.
He's not.
Are they all just commies? Is it all just communism?
There are versions of it. This is the spread. So every time something went wrong with the Soviet Union, it wasn't, that's debunked, let's try something else. It was that wasn't true Marxism. But because Lenin has put all this stuff into print, and he started this whole enterprise of the Marx intellectual industry, the churning out of academic texts, there's just this stream of new material to latch onto. So surplus value theory, even when it's debunked before the revolution, but Lenin tries to do these rigid industrial plans, and then Stalin tries to do even more aggressive industrial plans, and they all end in epic disasters. Forced collectivization on the farms ends in epic disasters. So by the end of World War II, they're like, yeah, hardcore Marxian economics doesn't work. But, oh, by the way, remember that publishing project that Lenin commissioned 25 years ago?
It's working great.
It turned up these new undiscovered manuscripts of Karl Marx from 1844. And they were on more like a mystical Hegelian version of Marxism rather than this rigid, formulaic economic version of Marxism. We're going to put that into print. So it gets published in the late 1930s. And then after the war, all these intellectuals that had now found Marxian economic central planning doesn't work, they pick up these new texts and go, well, the new text is a means of doing exegesis on Marx. Here's a new way to interpret him. Maybe he wasn't really about surplus value theory so much as, even though all Marx's own personal letters says, I'm a surplus value guy. Marx had this other concept called alienation or Entfremdung. Alienation is a sociological condition of the worker being exploited. It's not just the surplus value is materially being taken from this deprives him of like his agency and his feeling and meaning of connection to what he's doing in his life. Maybe the true core of Marxism is not social surplus value after all. It's Entfremdung, it's alienation. And now we have a whole new realm of academic work that we can do in these other fields that are not economics anymore about alienation as the great interpretive tool of why people feel dispossessed and excluded from society. And now we can map that onto race and on gender and on religion and on pedagogy and on ethnicity, all these different categories.
Yeah, so you get the Kimberly Crenshaws, you get the Antonio Gramsci's, you get all these other, they're all saying they're Marxist, like explicitly, but they all have their own focus. And it's rooted in really this alienation theory and some other parallel discoveries that are from the junk manuscripts Marx decided he didn't like and set aside when he's working on Capital. Well, maybe he dismissed his own true genius.
That's it. It's like there's a subtext of Marx that Marx had a false consciousness that led him to surplus value, and he really missed his own true insight, which is alienation.
There's been other writing about this, about that Marx, because I think when you drill into the technical components of it, it falls apart really quickly.
Yeah.
And when you try to engage people who are true believers in that, and they think they're like have a precise understanding of mechanisms, and then you press them on things, it's like you are suddenly in a hall of mirrors.
Right.
In my experience.
Right.
It's, among the problems that I'm most fond of is the debate that emerges out of that Austrian school from Menger, the socialist calculation, that the real problem is, even if the Soviet Union's central planners, even if the City Council of New York has perfect intentions and are beautiful, wonderful people, and they're not just a bunch of crooks, they literally just can't possibly draw out the subjective value in the minds of millions of people and then order it and plan it. Not just because they don't know it right now, but it changes over time. So even by the time you've written the plan, the impossible to know set of values that are in the minds of everybody on the basis of their circumstances, their time and place, that's all. It's dynamic. This is Hayek's spontaneous order. It's the fatal conceit. And von Mises basically lays it out first, I think, saying, look, you can't calculate the things that go into making this cup. This cup involves choices that aren't about emotion. They're about like, which material should we use? Well, given that people will only spend $10 on this mug, that defines the set of options I have. And I'm just going to look out and be like, well, ceramic's going a little up in price. Maybe we'll use plastic instead.
Yeah.
That's not about emotion. That's not about deep intrinsic. It's just a calculation you're going to make.
And there's the presence of choice.
And so there's millions and millions of decisions that go into every single thing on this table, that the price system of property, truck and barters, contracts, up and down, buying and selling, bidding, It does. It just does it. It's a giant computer. It's not even a computer. It's something else. It's an ecosystem.
It's an ecosystem, yeah.
Because a computer,
it's organic.
A computer suggests like
That someone programmed it.
that it's programmed, that it's deterministic, that there's actually like a literal clock ticking.
Yeah.
It's a rainforest. Just the stuff on this table is a literal rainforest of dynamic decisions being made. Why this wood? Why the material that was used to stain this wood this color versus the other ones that you could have used to achieve a similar color? Can't do it.
Yeah, yeah.
That hasn't stopped this sociological and I think maybe even theological thing. So I want to sort of finish our conversation on
how do we
this.
get back to, well, why is Marx dominant? And,
Is it ultimately a religion?
It certainly has that element, and I will quote John Maynard Keynes, of all people, basically said this. He was asked about Marx right after the Soviet Union had been created, and he says, Das Kapital, this is an obsolete textbook of no interest to the modern world. And when I engage with people that read it, they cite it to me as if they're screaming the Quran at me, not as if they're walking me through economic logic. And just, Keynes, of all people, he's a progressive guy. He's on the left.
Yeah.
And he's saying, yeah, this is utter nonsense economically. So you do have that element of religion that's brought in there, that it's treated as a sacred text. And that's why you get these new exegesis-style expositions of every time a new pamphlet appears out of Progress Publishers from the Soviet Union, it makes its way to the West. And like a decade later, all the Marxist scholars are like, oh, no, we found the new hidden text that helps us reinterpret Das Kapital and get around the problems that people had previously pointed out in Das Kapital.
It's the Gospel of Thomas, and now we know that, like, secretly, I don't know, like Jesus was married to Magdalene, or, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, all this other cockamamie crap that's been debunked by everyone that looks at it that's an actual historian of texts.
Exactly.
There is this through line, which is being manifestly, objectively hostile to people of faith, to religion.
Absolutely.
Mao says religion is the opiate of the masses. The Soviet Union and Maoist China and Pol Pot's Cambodia and Kim North Korea, they're all viciously anti-religious regimes. And Marx himself, as I understand it, there's two things I understand him to have done. One, just constantly mock the actual religion at the time, and seem to have a fascination with this Faust quote that everything that exists deserves to perish.
Right.
So let's just talk about the moral framework, the theological and ethical, the non-materialist Marx, which seems to be the only Marx that has survived in a true form.
And there's the interesting thing on it. Yeah, as you mentioned, Marx, when he writes about religion, it's sneering, it's mockery, it's derision. He came from a Jewish ancestry. So his grandfather was Jewish, although his father had converted, and he's not meaningfully raised in any religious context other than like German Christianity.
And I'm pretty sure he hates the Jews, too.
Oh, yeah, they're vicious anti-Semitic pamphlets, and his newspaper journalism he does, and like the only time he had a real job was in the 1850s. He was a part-time journalist, and he's writing conspiracy theories about how the Jewish financiers are manipulating the Crimean War. It reads
Sounds
like,
familiar.
It reads like Nick Fuentes or something today. But really out there stuff. But he's also dismissive of Christianity. He's dismissive of all faith in general. And this it kind of creates an opening because he's proclaimed himself the scientific socialist. He has a new understanding of the world. Something moves in and replaces it. And now carry that forward to like the mid-20th century. Marxian economics has been debunked. It's failed. Attempts to implement it end in famine, disaster, civil war, Stalin. After World War II, the world has finally figured out things are not all great in the Soviet Union, but they have this new alienation theory that they can re-inject. They have all these new cultural dimensions that they can re-inject into Marx. So we're like in the 1960s now. This is the second wave taken off. This is the critical theory term, reinvention of Marx. But the critical theorists, they all do a similar move. And so the English philosopher Roger Scruton had this great little devastating assessment of what was going on here, because he did a study of the critical theory phase of Marxism, the 60s to the present day, basically. And in his study, he says, all of these guys, they are kind of aware that the previous iterations of Marxism, the economic stuff, the real doctrinaire central planning stuff, has been debunked and it didn't work. But they sidestep that debate entirely. What they do, they don't engage Hayek. No. They don't engage Karl Popper. They don't engage even some of the critics of Marxism from the left, the democratic socialists or some of the Fabians in the UK that dismiss Marx. They don't look at any of the devastating critiques that had previously dislodged that version of Marxism and caused them to induce them to go in the more cultural direction. What they do is they say that the cultural, sociological, alienation theory version of Marx is the true Marx and always was. And that old stuff, it's a defunct debate that we don't need to deal with. But then they get to their policy prescriptions and they proceed anyway as if the old stuff were still true. And they implicitly bring it in through the back door. And Scruton has this great little line. He says, whenever they're confronted with the debunking of the original orthodox Marxism, all they respond to it with is a sneer. They just brush it aside and pretend, oh, well, that's no longer the debate. We have the true version in alienation theory or literary criticism and all this other more recent iterations of Marx. We don't have to deal with the mechanics of his dysfunctional economic system. But by the way, the dysfunctional economic system is true and we don't have to prove it.
I think for a lot of us, for a lot of people, but even for a lot of sort of people who are not Marxists,
mm-hmm.
I certainly want to believe that there's something like truth that tends to win out.
Yeah.
And when an idea or a thinker persists, this is sort of like a Burkean Chesterton's fence type thing. When it persists this long, there's something to it we have to contend with.
Yeah.
Is that how you think about the survival of Marx? Or like, it might be the case that we can literally just say these people have all been propagandized and have a desire to burn down the society now with no notion of what to replace it with, and they just insert Marx because it's all they've got.
Yeah.
But even the desire to burn the society down is coming from somewhere. So how do you think about as an academic who's had to swim in these waters with these people forever, what is driving them? Be an armchair psychologize. This crowd.
Yeah.
Because I can forgive like useful idiot Twitch streamers for just although at a certain point I stop forgiving them because you're enough of an adult for a long enough time that now you're responsible for your beliefs.
Yeah.
But if you're like a 19-year-old in college and you're enamored with Marx because you've got some gender studies class that's what they're teaching you, you're just a child and you're stupid, and that's okay. And we all make stupid mistakes and believe nonsense.
But then the professor.
But the professor, so what's going on there?
Yeah.
What's wrong with these people?
Yeah. So I don't want to be the person that says, hey, these are just envious people, although there is an element of envy undergirding Marx. It's a systematized theory that rationalizes envy, or it rationalizes action to take things away through the power of the state that you don't earn or you don't create yourself. So it does give an intellectual framework to get to the policy prescriptions that they want. And that's automatically going to make something appealing. But I think, a deeper psychological level, why is this so persistent in academia? Why is the PhD gender studies professor at Yale a devout Marxist? Why is the Shakespeare scholar, why is literature even dealing with Marxism to begin with? This would be like an astronomy department becoming obsessed with L. Ron Hubbard and starting to study the planets using Dianetics. I guess they're on the same theme, but it just doesn't make sense. Like there's no, but what Marx does is there's an acrobatic quality to him. There's this tendency that if you are in the know, you know the code, you have the decoder ring, you've been trained in these proprietary jargon concepts, whether it's surplus value or alienation or the subaltern or all these jargon terms that are exclusive to Marx's world. If you've been trained in that and you studied it, it's like you've been given the key to really understand what's going on. And this is the critical theory insight, because they say, the traditional theory, the thing that they're always juxtaposing themselves against, traditional theory, this is out of Max Horkheimer and Theodor Adorno, the early Frankfurt theorists. Say, traditional theory, it looks like it's this objective science of the world. It looks like it's descriptive, but it's really not. It's really just a sociological reinforcing mechanism to keep the capitalists on top, to keep the current order of things, the haves having what they have and the have-nots excluded. Critical theory, we are the liberationists. We are the people that interrogate what's taken at face value from traditional theory, and we discover that there's actually a secret power structure undergirding it.
So it's all basically just reveling in a conspiracy theory club.
It's a very conspiratorial way of looking at the world. And, it's not falsifiable. It's like, well, I have detected power disparities. What's my evidence of power disparity? Well, I know they're there because I've studied the subaltern, or I know they're there because I'm steeped in post-colonial theory, and I have this interminable and impenetrable jargon of tens of thousands of words saying essentially nothing. So Karl Popper is a great diagnostician. He's the philosopher of science. Falsifiability.
Yes. Can I if I'm doing science, I should actually actively try to disprove my hypothesis.
My own thesis, stress test it.
Yeah.
And that's how you do science. And Popper...
It's like, look at this. I have a theory that all mugs are black.
Yeah.
And some mugs have orange, but all mugs, the underlying color is black. Well, let me look around. Can I find any other colored mugs?
Yeah.
The second I find one, okay, I need to, at a minimum, revise my theory, if not outright throw
You
it out.
adjust according to evidence. Well, but the critical theory side says, well, the evidence itself, it's filtered through power structures and disparities and the haves and the have-nots. So Popper engages these people in the 60s and 70s. It has a very drawn-out debate with Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer, the original critical theory guys. And he says, I read these 1,000-page manifestos and stuff that they're publishing, and it's all a bunch of gibberish. It's all a circular exercise in self-reinforcing reasoning. And he says of Adorno, he says, I've tried to read his books, and I've come to the conclusion, he says nothing at all, but he says it in dense Hegelian language.
You see this in popular terms. This morning I was flipping through Twitter, which always is like a bad idea, frankly. But I'm flipping through Twitter and I come across some video, which I reposted like a jerk, of this young woman in Canada talking about something climate change is gendered and affects women. And it's like it's like a Mad Libs. Yeah. It's like a ball with a bunch of woke words that you just shake. Mm-hmm. Word comes out, say it. Shake. Next word, say it. And it's all the same thing, like equity, justice, gendered, feminine, feminist, something intersectional. Blah. It all. What are you talking about?
Yeah,
where's somebody that's responsible?
Yeah. And academic journals are full of this crap. And I can even prove it. So Bob Lawson and I, as an economist I work with, we put out kind of it's a humorous little book. It's a pamphlet called Neoliberal Abstracts. And what we did is we curated 100 of the craziest academic journal articles we could find complaining about neoliberalism or capitalism. And it's all this formulaic, take the Marxist jargon. I'll give you an example. There's a paper in there that's my favorite probably in the whole book. So there are 100 of these. The paper is a social theorist or sociologist or something like this, published in a peer-reviewed journal saying that hygiene standards on body odor that have been imposed on Marxists that smell bad are a neoliberal construct of capitalism to force this power disparity on them and keep them down and suppressed and excluded from society.
Yeah, I've had both Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay on the show. And
Yep.
I know Peter better. I consider him a friend, and well, the grievance studies.
That's exactly it.
It does sort of shine a light on this. But last part before we wrap up, there's another irony. It seems like to me that is under talked about, and that is that it appears that at least many of the most important socialist hubs are essentially petrol states.
Yeah.
So Russia is a petrol state.
Right.
Venezuela is a petrol state. Even Norway, which is still fundamentally like a classical liberal society, but of the Scandinavian countries, it's the one that is
most socialistic.
Yeah. It's an oil company. If you just unplugged massive oil wealth and coercive state funding, does all of socialism and its cultural construct just vanish? Like all these academics that are basically living parasitically off taxpayers, doing nothing of value other than like anti-value, like brainwashing kids to hate themselves? Does it all just go away tomorrow? Like if we just pull the plug on all their money and say, hey, you got a great theory you got there, get somebody to pay for it out of their own pocket. Does it all go away?
Right. This is the great question of academia itself. And I say socialist world and academia is certainly entrenched there. It's one of the biggest factions.
I mean, you've got your book here.
Yeah, Cracks in the Ivory Tower.
Cracks in the Ivy Tower. And I mean, so like, is that what we're dealing with? We're dealing with just a bunch of parasites?
Well, we know academia leans hard left, and it's gotten significantly worse in the last 2 decades. We're in the neighborhood of 65 to 70% of academics affiliate openly on the left, and there's a subset of that that's far left, the Marxist types, and they're really concentrated in the humanities and social sciences. And I studied this question, like how do they persist there? Because there's a paradox. Marxism's all over the place in the English department, but nobody wants an English degree. They're plummeting. It's all over the history department. No one wants a history degree. Majors are just dropping off. In all of the most woke disciplines, nobody wants a degree from them.
Because you can't do anything with it.
There's the problem. And how fun is it to sit in the classroom and be berated over the fact that you have an iPhone? It's just an interminable process of these are not fun majors for a reason. They're not popular majors for a reason. But they persist because they've wormed their way into the gen ed curriculum. To get a bachelor's degree, you have to take 4 semesters of English and communications and 2 semesters of history and 3 semesters of sociology just to pass your basic gen ed requirements before you can even pick your major. Mandatory butts and seats. And if you look at the gen ed curriculum, the woke disciplines are disproportionately represented there.
So basically, I didn't really think about that. That's really so. What do we do about that? How do we stop it?
Gen ed reform.
Because it's like, I guess at one level it's like, yeah, but I guess in theory you go and you get this thing called a bachelor's degree, and
you should be well-rounded,
and it's to make you more well-rounded as a person and be better read and be like a more full citizen type of person or whatever.
Well, and that's the argument behind it. It's like you should know Shakespeare, you should know a little physics, you should know a little math, you should know political science,
or you could just find and replace all those with you should know like devious Jew-hating, commie gobbledygook nonsense and race hustling.
Right. Well, and that's in practice what it's turned into. So I make this point, Jason Brennan and I do, in Cracks in the Ivory Tower. We call it the gen ed hustle. The fact that butts and seats are mandated in all of these classes. And the other part of it, the other part of the story, even though you're required to spend tens of thousands of dollars taking 4 semesters of English, they do the before and after test of students and ask if they learned anything in the class. Every student hates these classes. They're blow-off classes. Their critical thinking skills do not improve afterward because they're like, oh, this There's like 10% of the students in the class, yay, Marxism, and the other 90% is, I have to go to English class again. I don't learn anything in there, but they hector me about climate change. So,
but it's an easy A because it's basically imbecile talk.
Yeah, you regurgitate the jargon back to the professor, and they're like, "Oh, all right, we'll pass you through there." So we are wasting tons of money by making students. It's a transfer from students who are generally economically precarious. There's the irony of it. You have these upper middle class, well-educated Marxist humanities professors depending on mandatory butts and seats to fill their classrooms because they can't attract any majors. Nobody wants to study with them. And that money is coming from the pockets of 18 and 19-year-olds that are having to take out tens of thousands of dollars in student loans just to take the junk blow-off class in English and sociology before they can go study accounting or physics.
And what you see there, I think, is the way the system keeps itself alive, because you get the Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders types who want to make college free.
Yep.
And so then they've basically locked in a permanent parasitic vortex of people like Elizabeth Warren, who was a
college professor
making like $400,000 while teaching like 2 classes.
Yeah.
So we're hectored about selfishness by people who want to have a permanent paycheck to
in the upper middle class.
Yeah, and live in the upper middle class in places like Austin and Madison, Wisconsin, and State College, Pennsylvania, and the like, and all of Massachusetts, and create no value, create negative value.
Yeah.
So
and extract it from poor students that they're having to take out loans to take these classes they don't want and don't need and don't learn anything in. So it's a real racket.
as a parent, what should I do to help my daughter?
Yeah.
Because I might need to help my son not get sucked into too much right-wing crazy stuff. As much as I'm a right-winger proudly. But, let's take the archetypal modern American daughter who's got some emotional fragility and is heading into a world where she's about to have all of that emotional vulnerability exploited by this parasite class for gen ed credits, and tell her why she lives in the worst culture at all, and that's why she needs to be on the lines for Queers for Palestine or whatever cockamamie thing that seems like a joke but is actually what's really happening.
Actually right.
What do I do?
Right. So pick your college as well if they go to college. And I'd urge this of any parent out there. Ask, when you're going and doing the campus tour, ask what the gen ed requirements are. If you show up and it requires 4 semesters of English, 2 semesters of sociology, 3 semesters of history, but only 1 semester of economics that you can also opt out of by taking a sociology class, that's a big red flag. That means that 1/3 of their degree or more is going to be in deeply politicized disciplines. So pay attention to that. Second thing I tell parents, test out of those courses if they can. Take the AP class. Get your English classes out of the way in high school. Take the test, turn in your score. That means you're exempt from not only the woke propaganda that's coming to you in that department, it also means you saved $6,000 in tuition.
What about, is community college to knock those credits off another way to do it?
Absolutely. Now, community college also has the wokeness in it. It's a jobs program in many respects so all these fields, the history, sociology, anthropology, gender studies, they're oversaturated. There are far more people with PhDs in those things than there are jobs. So they filter out into other things. And they take over college administration and
HR departments.
You name it.
Yeah.
It's like a giant jobs program for people with unemployable degrees.
Well, one of the prior to Marx ideas that Marx does rely on, if I remember this correctly, in Das Kapital, is this sort of the crisis of overproduction in capitalism, right? Oh, capitalism overproduces goods, and that's why you get booms and busts because of overproduction. Yeah. Well, it looks like communism overproduces
PhDs.
PhDs in bullshit.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment of it.
I think that's some actually tangible advice. That's really helpful and super practical. And as we sit here at the end of the school year, looking ahead for the high school graduating families,
It's get your kids through college. You want to do it as efficiently and quickly as possible if they go to college. So that means test out of the nonsense classes, take it at the community college where it's at least 1 or 2 steps removed and like a tenth of the price.
Yeah.
Transfer the credit in there. We've been inculcated into thinking a college degree has to take at minimum 4 years. And oftentimes it's like the 5 or 6 year plan where you go discover yourself doing theater or something. That's a giant waste of money. It also means that you're probably oversaturating yourself in these nonsense classes. Think about it in a way, can I get done in 3 years if I test out with AP English, History, and Sociology? Can I get done in 3 years if I take this mandatory gen ed class in communications at the local community college over the summer before I start? It's probably going to be cheaper. It'll probably you aren't going to get any difference in terms of the rigor because these classes taught at Harvard are essentially vacuous intellectual wastelands when they're done in this Marxist style. Like the English class in the Ivy Leagues is the same class you get at the community college with the same political nonsense, but 10 times the price tag.
I ask this question of every guest. The show's called Dad Saves America because I think that, while we talk about these big subjects, that's the Saves America part. I think we as fathers in our families play this role that ladders up to that. It starts with how we raise our kids, how we conduct ourselves in our family, and it ladders out to the community. In your work, in your life, how do you think about your role in the American story?
Yeah. So I am in some ways an educator. I'm some ways a provocateur. I'm, some ways trying to challenge existing narratives that I find out there. I'm also in some ways trying to hold bad research, unrigorous scholarship to account. And, my aim here is actually the end game is I want to elevate the discussion. I want to elevate the intellectual quality of the conversation that we are having. That means rooting out some bad ideas. But it also means taking those ideas seriously and trying to figure out something like Marxism, which I think is demonstrably wrong. It fails the core Popper-style scientific test of falsifiability. It fails the intellectual scrutiny that it has endured, and yet it persists. So asking that question, why does it persist? I'm raising awareness and putting Marxist doctrine in a position of discomfort that it's not used to facing when that entire discussion is this echo chamber of the university system.
Phil Magness, thanks for being on Dad Saves America.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.